We will continue with sort of the theme of new reforms and new policies that are being implemented in our schools, and hand it over to Julian Betts. Julian is a professor of economics at the University of California, San Diego, and is also an adjunct fellow at Public Policy Institute of California.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'd like to thank PPIC for funding the review and editing and publication of this report, and the Yankelovich Center at UCSD for funding some of the initial research. This is joint with my colleagues Sam Young, Andrew Zhao, and Karen Backover at UCSD. And there's a link between our report and the one you just heard in the sense that it's looking at what happens when you change standards. It's pretty clear with Smarter Balance we change standards. Here we're going to be talking about one of a number of districts that have changed standards in a different way by changing graduation standards. And we're going to be focusing in particular on San Diego Unified. So it's easy to motivate this. President Obama has on many occasions called for U.S. high schools to serve two different goals, to make people ready when they graduate from high school for careers and to make them ready for college. The ACLU has been very active on the latter front in California, lobbying some of the largest districts in California to make college preparatory coursework more accessible to students regardless of their socioeconomic status. And as part of that, Ed Trust West did some transcript surveys or audits in a number of large districts. It did it in San Diego Unified. After that was done in San Diego Unified, which is the second largest district in the state, decided that its solution to unequal access to college preparatory coursework would be to make the so-called ADAG coursework mandatory for everybody in the district if they're to graduate from high school. Some other major districts in California have adopted similar policies. LA and San Francisco in particular have very closely aligned policies to what is being done in San Diego. I'll talk about what's happening there towards the end of this talk. And Oakland and San Jose have a slight variance of this policy, which I'll refer to briefly as well. But we're going to be talking here mostly about San Diego. So let's talk first about what the ADAG requirements are and how they've changed. They've changed the graduation requirements in San Diego. So any of you who has gone to Cal State or UC or has students who might be going there in a few years are very familiar with the ADAG course sequences. Students need to complete 15-year-long courses in 7 different subject areas with grades of C or higher in all of those courses in order to be eligible to attend Cal State or the University of California. And you can see here what they are. Each letter refers to a different subject. So A is history and social studies. B is 4 years of English language arts, and so on. In San Diego, when it implemented this as a new mandatory graduation requirement, the real changes had to do with math, where there was a 3-year requirement before, but now all 3 courses have to be at the ADAG level, which wasn't the case in San Diego before. And also, in the past, students didn't need to take any world language in order to graduate. Now they do. And bear those 2 courses in mind, because you'll see they're 2 of the binding constraints. In San Diego, the class of 2016 is going to be the first class subject to this new requirement. So we have 2 months to go to find out what's going to happen. And what I'm going to be presenting to you today is results from a transcript analysis. We followed students all the way up through the end of summer school last summer. So we're looking at students as they're poised to start their senior year, and we're going to be predicting how many people are on track to go to college, how many people are on track to graduate. There's one distinction between what all of these districts that I've mentioned are doing and what UC and Cal State require. UC and Cal State require grades of C or higher in order to be eligible to attend college. Each of these districts I've mentioned have actually set the grade requirement at D or higher. And I think the idea here was to create a compromise. Ultimately, the goal is to equalize opportunity. So regardless of whether your parents are college grads or high school dropouts, everybody should have access to college preparatory coursework, but they set the bar lower at grades of D or higher because all of these districts were concerned that the graduation rate could plummet. And if you're trying to equalize opportunity, that's probably not a wise approach to be taking. And that explains this difference in the grade requirements here. A couple of the districts that I've mentioned actually allow students to opt out and still obtain a high school diploma. San Jose Unified was the first district to implement an ADAG college grad norm, but it's become clear to observers that students can opt out of that in San Jose and still get a regular high school diploma. And if you look at the percent of high school graduates from San Jose graduating with grades of C or higher in A to G, it's trended up at about the same rate as all districts statewide since 2002. So it really hasn't served the goal of getting more people eligible for college. Oakland Unified has a new policy that was implemented with last year's graduating class. We don't know the official graduation rates yet, but Oakland Unified pretty clearly has an opt-out provision as well. The two other districts I'm going to mention are San Francisco and LA Unified. They're much closer to San Diego in making A to G actually a requirement for a regular high school diploma. So I'll talk about them and prospects for students there towards the end of the talk. All right, so let's look at what's happening in course taking. And what we're going to do here is look at different graduating classes of. So don't think of calendar years. Think of a student who's set to graduate in 2016 or 2017 based on the year they were first enrolled in grade 9. And we're going to look at some trends in course taking and completion. So this is showing the number of courses completed and passed that are A to G by the end of grade 9. And on the horizontal axis here, what we have is the expected year of graduation based on the year in which students are first enrolled in grade 9. The black line is showing number of A to G courses attempted, and you'll see there's a pretty strong positive trend here over time. What we're interested in looking at is the question, is there a break from trend for the classes of 2016 and later? Because those are the cohorts that have to meet this new A to G requirement, and you can see pretty clearly that there is a break from trend, a positive break for trend from the classes of 2016 and later, and is statistically significant. This is just showing courses attempted. This sort of greenish line here is showing the number of courses completed with grades of D or higher. There's a positive trend and a positive break from trend from the cohorts that are subject to this new graduation requirement. And then finally, remember the ultimate goal here is probably really to get more people ready for college. This bottom dark green line is showing trends in the number of A to G semester courses completed by end of grade 9. Very positive trend for many, many years in San Diego. But again, there's a break after 2015, and again, it's statistically significant. In the report that you have in front of you, you see a similar graph for grade 10, which I don't have time to show, but here's the graph showing number of courses completed and attempted by the end of grade 11. And so for the class of 2016, again, you see a positive break from a long-standing positive trend. Now, when you look at that trend and that break from trend, you have to ask yourself, is that a revolutionary change or an evolutionary change? It's not huge. The average student has taken something like an extra 1 or 1.2 semester courses by the end of grade 11. That's about a 3 percentage point increase in number of A to G courses completed. But it is a change in the right direction. Now, who is improving their A to G course completion to the greatest extent? You'd hope that it would be students from lower socioeconomic status groups, because they're probably going to have a bigger hill to climb. And the good news here is that's exactly what we see. What this is showing is the number of additional A to G courses taken by students in each group compared to what we would have predicted giving pre-existing trends. And what we're doing here is dividing students by their parents' level of education. Students whose parents had less than a high school diploma, in other words, high school dropouts, showed the biggest increase, about a 1.8 course increase in courses taken by the end of grade 11. Students whose parents graduated from high school or took some college show almost as big increases. These asterisks here are just saying this is a break from trend that's significant for these groups. The two parental education groups showing the smallest increases are students whose parents went to grad school or who were college graduates. So there's good news there, because we want students who are least likely to be able to complete the A to G to show this biggest improvement, and that's exactly what we're finding. But of course, they have a bigger hill to climb. Now, let's cut to the chase here. What is our estimate of projected graduation rates this June, given data up through August last year at the end of summer school? And what about graduation rates? Are they going to stay where they were before? And this really gets to the whole point of equality of opportunity. On the one hand, we'd like more students to be eligible to attend university, but there's a distinct risk in this policy that more people may not be able to graduate on time. So let's start here with the good news. It seems quite clear that as of August last year, in the class of 2016, maybe 10% more students are on track to graduate being eligible to attend UC or Cal State. In other words, they're going to complete all the ADAG courses with grades of C or higher. So it's going to be about 57% compared to about 47% a couple of years ago in the district. So that's really, if that happens, that actually transpires, it's going to be a great victory for the students in San Diego Unified. But now this is a double-edged sword, this policy. So now let's look at the other question. How many students are on track to graduate? And the way we calculated the percent on track to graduate was by reasoning that you're in your senior year, starting last September. A typical student in San Diego Unified can take 6 year-long courses. We're going to assume that all of those are ADAG courses and that you're going to get grades of D or higher in every single one of those courses. And then we ask, are you actually going to be able to complete all of the ADAG requirements? What we found was that 73% of students, as of August last year, were on track to complete the ADAG requirements with D or higher by this June. And San Diego's also had a GPA requirement. You can't graduate unless you have a cumulative GPA of 2.0. Another 1% of students who would meet the ADAG requirement are not meeting that. So our projected graduation rate, using data from last summer, is 72%. Now, is that high or low? Well, 2 years ago, in 2014, the graduation rate in June was 87.5%. So what we're getting here is a possibility of a 15.5% drop in the graduation rate. So some students are being helped, other students may be hurt by this policy. Now, I will get to some comments about what's going on during this school year with interventions in the district. The district is fairly confident that the graduation rate is going to be well above this, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. A natural question you might have is, well, just how far behind are students? What we're showing here is the number of subject areas in which students are off track, meaning that they have more than a year's worth of work to complete during their senior year in 2015-16. So here are 73% of students who are on track. They've got 6 courses they can take this year. They're going to be fine. There are 12% of students who have more than a year of work to complete in just one subject. So I think there's some hope that maybe some of those students will be graduating this June if they can catch up. Of greater concern is these students here who have more than a year of work to complete in anywhere from 2 all the way up to 5 subject areas. So that's going to be very hard for some of these students to graduate on time. Maybe they'll graduate after summer school this summer, but some of them will probably not even graduate after summer school. Which subjects are causing the biggest problems? Well, in order, it's English, followed by math, followed by world languages. But there's actually some good news here in world languages. There was not a requirement to take any world language in the district a few years ago. And so we've seen actually better improvements in ADAG course completion in world language than in any other subject area. But if you look at any of these subjects, I think English is the one that causes the greatest concern for us. 23% of students have more than a year's worth of work to complete in English as of last fall. And so if you look at the light blue bar, that's students who have 3 semester courses to complete. It's about 5 or 6% of students. These remaining students have 4 to 6 or even more courses to complete. English learners are disproportionately represented in this group. Something like 12% of students in our sample were English learners in grade 9, but far more than 12% of English learners are in this group here. 28% of students who are off track in English are English learners. So we need to focus on English learners. This is probably going to be true in the other districts as well. Then math, I think, should concern everybody because typically you take math courses in sequence, and there's some students who have yet to complete the equivalent of Algebra 1. They're going to have a lot of trouble graduating this year for obvious reasons. What sort of variations do we see across language and racial ethnic groups? What we're showing here is a percentage of students who are on track to graduate in the class of 2016 by June. Whites and Asians are well into the 80+% range. African Americans and Hispanics are at much lower levels. Around 66% and 62% of African Americans and Hispanics are on track to graduate on time. Before I showed you some great results related to parental education, we showed that students whose parents were high school dropouts had improved the most, but they had the biggest hill to climb. And what you'll see here is there's this stark relationship between parental education and likelihood that you're on track to graduate. In June, 90% of students whose parents went to graduate school are on track to graduate in June. Come down here to high school dropouts, it's only, I believe, 57% on track to graduate on time. Special education and English learner, these are statuses we defined as of grade 9. Special ed students, fewer than half are on track to graduate. Only 38% are on track to graduate. And of students who are English learners in grade 9, the news is actually worse. Only 34% are on track to graduate. I already showed you one of the reasons for that. English language arts is the subject area that's the biggest barrier for students, and English learners are disproportionately represented in that group. So what is being done in this and other districts to try to help students get over the hump, and what are prospects in the other districts? So LA Unified is on exactly the same timetable as San Diego. The class of 2016, graduating 2 months from now, is going to be the first class subject to this new requirement. The district did some calculations. Their graduation rate in 2014 was 74%, not particularly high. They're forecasting now that 63% of students in the class of 2016 are on track to graduate. The good news, though, is that they're spending a lot of money in LA Unified on interventions like online credit recovery. The district did some calculations this fall, and at that time, only 54% of seniors were on track to graduate. It's now up to 63%. This may be optimistic in the following sense. The way LA Unified calculated that number was to look at all the courses that students are enrolled in right now, and they assumed that students will pass every single one of those classes. That's how you get to 63%. So even at that level, you're predicting a drop of 11 percentage points in graduation rates. San Francisco Unified, very different story. The class of 2014 was the first subject to this new requirement, and the graduation rate actually edged up a little bit there from about 82% in summer 2013 to about 84% in summer 2014. Comparing these districts, they're really quite different. If you look at the percentage of graduates from these three districts who historically have completed A to G with grades of C or higher, San Francisco is way above the other two. San Diego Unified has about 10% fewer students graduating completing A to G historically, and LA is about 10 percentage points below San Diego. So what we think here is that we've got some really positive results from San Francisco. San Diego is probably going to be behind that, and LA, our guess is going to be behind San Diego as well, just based on where they're starting from. So some policy implications, not just for these districts, but for other districts that are contemplating making A to G a graduation requirement. What are some policies that we could put in place here? Let's start by talking about some things that have actually been done. San Diego Unified has spent a lot of money in the last 4 years in expanding summer school, and we actually have evidence that for the class of 2016, this is making a real difference. That you can see in July and August last year, students completing more classes. There's a new policy that was implemented just this fall in a quite massive way. They've implemented online credit recovery classes that are A to G certified. So this is about 60 hours of classroom time, online learning, and an online exam. And the district's hopeful that they can actually match the 89-90% graduation rate of August 2014 by this August. And they're really pinning their hopes on this. And of course, we all hope that they're right. But students have a long, long way to go. Another thing that San Diego Unified has done, which I think is quite important, is that it used to be the case that not all middle schools provided world language courses. And they are doing so now. And that really mattered, because in the more affluent parts of the city, students would routinely finish the 2-year world language requirement by end of grade 9, because they start in middle school. sometimes they'd even finish this before grade 9. Not all middle schools were offering this in San Diego. Now all schools are doing this. San Francisco Unified has spent a lot of money on online credit recovery courses, and they credit a lot of the improvement from what they feared was going to happen to the very high graduation rate that they got to these credit recovery courses. And as I mentioned before, LA Unified is spending about $15–16 million this year on all sorts of things, online credit recovery courses, Saturday school, all sorts of things like that. That's probably not going to be enough. There are going to be some students, especially in San Diego and LA, who are probably not going to graduate either this June or by August after summer school. So trying to re-enroll students who are in grade 12 this year for one final year of high school will probably be a really important thing to do. Richard Murnane at Harvard has an important study showing that nationwide, the gap in graduation rates, say between African Americans and whites, is quite big. But if you look at 5 years after entering grade 9 instead of 4 years, that gap actually narrows. So we're hopeful that this could be something that can help in all of the districts. The other thing I think that's really important is to think about preventive programs. And here, I and my co-authors are not really talking about preventive programs in grade 12, like online credit recovery. We're talking about earlier. We have a model we use in the paper that uses grade 6 data to try to forecast who's going to complete A to G coursework. And the model is remarkably successful. The report you have in front of you gives the details of what variables are predictive. What that model tells us is that probably any district pretty easily identify students in grade 6 or even earlier who are off track to complete A to G and start supporting them. This seems particularly important for English learners who are, as you can see, vastly represented in the students who are off track to graduate this June. And for everybody, not just English learners, math is a key area. Intervening early, getting those pre-algebra concepts down well before grade 8 is really, really fundamental. So college prep for all, I think, is a great and worthy goal. It's also, I think, experience is showing, a quite difficult goal. It's the for all part that's really, really difficult. I think we're really coming up to a watershed moment in San Diego Unified history. The district thinks that the interventions underway this year are actually going to carry the day, and we hope that that's going to prove to be the case. It's really in the end about equality of opportunity, about offering everybody access to college courses. And it looks like about 10% more students could be going to college from San Diego this fall. As a result of this policy, that's a great victory. But the downside is that at least as many may not graduate on time, and I think we all need to be very concerned about that. And I think the answer is, if we want these policies to persist in the long run, it's this. Districts need to find and marshal resources to support students as early as possible. So let me stop there and take your questions. And like before, Kelly has the microphone. So any questions?
I don't know if I was reading your data right, but it looks like science wasn't a problem, that everybody was meeting that, which strikes me as kind of interesting. Is that because there's more 4 years to take instead of 2, or students are engaged in science?
Right.
Or because often we find ourselves behind in that area.
Right. San Diego has had a very stringent science requirement for many years. So requiring 2 years of lab science wasn't really a change at all for San Diego. So this could be very different in other districts. But you're right. I think you're making a very important point. In other districts, things could look very different. In San Diego, it was math and world languages, where if you compare the old standards to the new, things were getting much more difficult now. That's an insightful question. Okay, the next person to ask a question wins a car. Just kidding.
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions. One related to English learners. Did you tease out how many were long-term English learners from your data? And then the second question is applying to English learners, but to all students that might be over-enrolled, if you will, in remedial classes, and how is it that they can actually have access to the A to G required courses?
Right. So long-term English learners play a big role here. Our definition of English learners was, we took a snapshot at the start of grade 9 and asked, are you an English learner at that time? And I'm trying to think, Laura and I have been doing some work on English learners in LA Unified and San Diego Unified for a few years. I'm trying to remember what % of English learners in grade 9 would be long-term, but my guess is well over half. And so a lot of these kids have been in those ELD courses for some time. The district has always been pretty careful when kids get reclassified to make sure they get put in regular English classes. And that emphasis has been obviously reinforced by this need to get students to graduate. So what the district is doing is they have some people who created a spreadsheet for every single student in the class of 2016, and they were looking at what classes they were scheduled to be enrolled in starting this fall. So they're relying first on principals and counselors to make the right decisions, but above that, they've got someone in the central district offices making sure that students don't slip through the cracks, and the students you've identified, long-term English learners, could be students who's otherwise slipped through the cracks, but they're being put into English classes that qualify for A to G the minute that they're reclassified. And I think the upper level English classes for English learners actually qualify. So we'll see. But it is a big struggle. And late arriving English learners, who are a minority of the English learners in our sample, they're probably in more dire straits because they're learning English for the first time. They're going to be among the X percent, 10, 15, 20% who are not going to be graduating this spring for sure.
So it seems to me that one of the preventive issues that you were talking about should be elimination of all remedial classes and make sure that the students have the skills so they're not taking those remediation classes in high school so they can meet all those requirements.
Right. So for those of you back who didn't hear the start of the question, the proposition was made that maybe we should get rid of all remediation classes to make sure that students can complete these. I mean, to some extent that could work, but when we have, for instance, late arriving English learners, some of whom haven't had any formal education in their home country before arriving, those remedial classes, the newcomer programs that we have, for instance, in San Diego Unified, are extraordinarily important, and students would flounder if they hadn't been through that first. So there will be some students who are probably going to be in high school for more than 4 years before they graduate. Sadly, I think it's going to be inevitable. It's a good question.
Hi, Julian. Thank you for your study. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you had tracked anything related to any in-school academic success programs, such as AVID, since that's kind of where the birthplace was in San Diego. Secondly, did you track anything related to the UC A to G CTE courses, such as those available through the UC Curriculum Integration Institutes?
Right. We haven't looked specifically at those types of courses. We did look at CTE more broadly than the UC provided CTE courses. And we did this because we were concerned about this new intervention possibly having some negative side effects. We were worried that students would stop taking CTE courses. And that's because career and technical education courses are less likely to be A to G than more academic courses. We did some work for the U.S. Department of Education about 5 years ago in which only about 7% of CTE courses in the district were A to G. Now it's much higher than that. It's around 30-40% in the district, but still, that's relatively low. We couldn't find any drop-off in CTE course completion. And that's really important because President Obama keeps talking about high schools have dual goals, college and career readiness, and CTE courses are a really important part of getting people ready for careers. So that hasn't happened. We also looked at, this deviating a little bit from your question, but while we're on the question of side effects, we thought maybe GPAs, grade point averages, would fall. We thought that maybe people would stop attending if they got discouraged. People might leave the district or switch to charter schools in the district, which generally don't have the A to G requirements. We really didn't find strong evidence for any of those things, which was really good. And the first part of your question, there was CTE, and what was the other part? AVID. Yeah, AVID's a great program, and we haven't really had a chance to study that yet. But that could certainly be playing a role here. Absolutely.
Hi. On the interventions, did you find any room for a greater role for more guidance counselors and mental health counselors as part of the process? Right.
Well, San Diego Unified is a lot of other districts in California that has a very, very, very high ratio of students to counselors in high schools. I think the last time I checked about 10 years ago, I'm guessing you know the actual data, but I think California ranked in the bottom 10 nationwide for ratio high school students to counselors. So we haven't studied that specifically. We know that counselors have been working with students to tell them as early as grade 9 that you're going to be subject to this. So they have been working with students in that sense. And counselors and principals have been working to try to make sure that at the start of the next school year, students are enrolled in the right courses. I don't have any information on the mental health aspect, but I think that's really interesting. So you're asking about another side effect that maybe we could be looking at. And I think you've given me a good idea. The secondary school report cards in San Diego have citizenship grades in every single course. That's not quite the same thing as mental health, but it's a behavioral measure which shows huge variation across students, and we found in other work that's very predictive of all sorts of long-term outcomes. So maybe that's something we could look at in future work. So thank you for that.
Was it possible, or could it be possible in the future for you to look at how these students do on community college and CSU, for that matter, assessments for their knowledge of English and math?
Right. That's a great idea. It's the second time I've heard that today. I think it's a terrific idea. The first thing we'd like to do is just to look at how many graduate. We do have the capability right now to follow students into college. So we know who's enrolled where and who gets an associate's degree, who gets a bachelor's degree. We don't have access statewide to the remedial data, but I think it's a great idea. And when a lot of students are probably going to graduate having taken at least one of these online credit recovery courses. They're apparently quite rigorous, but still, it's 60 hours of classroom time. It's a lot shorter than normal school year. I think we kind of have concerns about whether the skills that have been learned there are really going to stick in the long term. And that could show up if as many as 10% more students are going to college this fall. We'd love to first verify that, but second, if we could check this. It's hard to get the data, but I'd love to be able to study that. It's a great question.
Well, the community colleges are likely to be adopting a uniform math assessment. So you take a test and have it available for any college, and that will make that comparability much easier to deal with.
Absolutely. Thank you for telling me about that.
Sure.
I'm just curious, with the cost of college becoming inaccessible for many, many people, structuring a high school program, assuming that college is even approachable for the kids, seems to be, to me, a little bit off base. Did anybody consider what a high school student needs to survive in an economy and a society that we have now, and not maybe an approachable end goal, but because not everybody even needs to go to college. And giving them the ability to go to college is making the funnel smaller and kicking their butt harder to get them through that funnel, to me.
Right. I think the district's point of view here is that giving them the capability of going to college, if that's what they see in their future, is a noble thing to do. The districts, I don't think, are expecting that 100% of their students will graduate and go to college. I mean, California does do a very good job, though, of providing subsidies to lower income students in college. UC, for example, has the Blue and Gold Scholarship, which essentially pays for all tuition and fees if your family income is below a certain level. And then there's another scholarship, I've forgotten the exact name of the middle class scholarship for families that have higher incomes, but still not very high incomes. So that, I think, can help. But on top of it, if you're growing up in Barrio Logan in San Diego and you get admitted to UC Davis, it's not just tuition and fees. You need to worry about room and board if you're going to go all the way to Davis as well. So there are other expenses associated with attending college, which you really have to be cognizant about. So thinking about colleges that are local, I think, can be really helpful for some of these students who may not have gone to college otherwise and who are very, very low income. But on top of it, I've always wondered, if you did a survey of all Californians, how many of them even know about the Blue and Gold Scholarship? I would love to know the answer to that. Does that answer your question? It was a multifaceted question. I'm never good at those.
That sort of answered it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for coming today.